Hello and welcome to Empire of Wargames. My name is Eblesh and today we are going to talk about how to start a Necron army from the perspective of a narrative or crusade player, as well as from the perspective of a budget conscious gamer. If you enjoy the content, consider leaving a thumbs up and subscribing, as well as following me over on Twitch and Twitter. Alright, let's get into the video. So if you and your friends just started with Warhammer 40k, you probably want to start small. I would recommend starting small when it comes to Crusade anyway, even if all of you have 8k armies standing around and doing nothing but gathering dust. I recommend that because Crusade can get really complex really quick depending on how expensive your campaign gets, and thus starting small and adding up, increasing the number of units, the number of points or power level depending on how you play, is easier to follow and makes games that much more enjoyable because you get more games in. Once you reach the threshold of 2000 point games, you will easily play for 4 hours or more, and that means you don't get as many Crusade games in, and thus the campaign gets longer and longer and longer. And so the easiest recommendation I can first give to basically any of the target audiences I talked about in the opening or in the beginning is to just get the Necron Combat Patrol box, because it offers you a decent start for Crusade, because, starting with 500 points lists is probably the quickest way to start and finish a Warhammer 40k game, and meanwhile the savings out of this box are pretty good as well. The only way to save even more money are the starter sets, but we are going to talk about them in a bit. So when it comes to Crusade, obviously 500 points and the Necron Combat Patrol are great. There's one caveat though, is, having a flyer on a small Combat Patrol board is usually not ideal. You also usually don't want to have super high toughness vehicles in your Combat Patrol games because it's just annoying. You can't really do anything about them unless you bring dedicated anti-vehicle fire, and not every faction has them on a cheap unit, and thus squeezing them into a 500 points or 25 power level list is a little difficult. There are different house rules and different ways to approach this topic, so if you play Combat Patrol size games or anything below 1000 points really, there are a lot of great rule sets on the internet which basically limit the army selection a tiny bit, which basically says no unit above toughness 7 I think, or toughness 6, and generally no flyers and that kind of stuff. And that's basically all there is to do to have like fun little small quick games, 1 hour of Warhammer 40k and you're done. And it's perfect for the first couple of Crusade games, just to get the campaign going, to see what everyone's goal is, and to get a couple of matches in against all of the other players who are also participating in your Crusade campaign. If you are looking to replace the flyer, the best way is probably to just get a Recruit Edition. In the Recruit Edition, you get your usual 10 Necron Warriors, 3 Scarab Swarms, and a Royal Warden. And that's relatively cheap considering the Necron Warriors box costs almost the same. So you might as well buy the Recruit Edition. Other than that, you obviously have the Elite Edition if you want to have a little bit more stuff in there, like Scorpion Destroyers and another, Necron Lord for whatever reason, Overlord. And that's that. If you are lacking terrain, you obviously always can get the Command Edition, which makes sense if you really just started playing Warhammer 40k and you have no terrain whatsoever. It is better to have like a little bit of stuff than no stuff, but you can always just use books or, cans of energy drinks or whatever have you in your house. But if you want to have proper terrain, the Command Edition is definitely not a bad buy. And this also applies to the budget conscious gamer. If you want to start a Necron army for really, really cheap and not, try and having a look on eBay or similar pages every single day to check if someone is selling their completely painted army for like a quarter of the price they bought it for, you can buy the Recruit Edition or the Elite Edition or the Command Edition and just sell the Space Marines, which are being sold on eBay, and they go away, and they go away quick depending on what price you put them in. But you can save yourself yourself a whole bunch of money. It's really, we're talking about getting the Recruit Edition for £15, maybe £10 if you are really lucky. And it's crazy for a Royal Warden, 10 Warriors, and 3 Scarab Swarms. Lastly, and I already mentioned that in the last competitive army creation video for the Necrons, is that there are boxes that, you know, aren't really budget focused or budget conscious at all, and they really don't add a lot to your narrative or your Crusade army. And those are boxes like Pariah Nexus, for example. You are getting 5 flayed ones in there and a Chronomancer. And while the Chronomancer is really cool and strong, and flayed ones have a ton of flavor, especially if you are playing like a really forgotten, kind of destroyed and grimy looking Necron army, flayed ones really do fit in, but flayed ones are super expensive and definitely not cheap. And the Chronomancer you can also get separately, because the whole terrain inside the box is not really useful for regular Warhammer 40k, because it's just basically scatter terrain and it does nothing for regular combat patrol games, for example, other than being, I don't know, barricades, I guess. And yeah, and you're getting a lot of Space Marines, and you won't use them either unless you happen to collect Space Marines as well. So boxes like Pariah Nexus I would skip. Even if you could sell all the stuff, the terrain won't go away or be very, very cheap and, you know, net you very little money in the long run. And yeah, Pariah Nexus is just a clear skip. And another thing I wanted to mention is that if you find the previous Apocalypse box for the Necrons from 2019 or the previous Battle Force from 2020, you should probably pick them up if they are not way above MSRP. Ideally below MSRP or at MSRP, but never above. If it's above, it's not worth it. And yeah, those are super rare. They sold out immediately. And yeah, if you find them somewhere in a tiny store for MSRP, I would really recommend getting them, because what you're getting in there is crazy good. It works well, and it always adds to your Necron army, and the compositions are just plainly great. Especially the Battle Force is amazing. The Apocalypse box requires a little bit of, you know, kind of troops and infantry, but it can be an outrider detachment if you want it to be. And lastly, there is Endometers, which is obviously the best value. The Space Marines are extremely expensive, and you can sell them for easily 3/4 of the price you paid for MSRP for the Endometers box in like a couple of months when they get super rare, because the only alternative to get the important units from either half of Endometers are these 2 boxes, and they are super overpriced, and you can only get them on GW's webpage, and it's insane. No one wants to buy them, at least as far as I know, and that's why those Endometers halves are going away for a lot of money, because even if someone pays a lot of money for that half, it's probably still cheaper than getting that box and everything else separately. Sad truth. And yeah, that's everything you need to keep in mind on. When it comes to narrative games especially, take a close look at what your dynasty says. If you have your own homebrew dynasty, you know best what unit represented best. Because as I said, some of the grimy dynasties, I know some people playing, they really love their flayed ones. It's very, very sad that flayed ones are as expensive as they are, but they are really cool sculpts and units, and I can see them being used. If you play, for example, the Saracen dynasty, you probably want to pay a little bit more attention to your overlords or your characters, because, I don't know, it just gives off the vibe, the lore gives off the vibe, that characters are the main focal point of the Saracen dynasty. And obviously at some point, maybe if your Crusade campaign, if you play them there as well, allows for characters, you can throw in the Silent King, which is kind of cool. And yeah, for narrative, it's mainly just paying attention to what the law says, and then taking a look if any of those value boxes, that's the first thing you should do, offers you a good starting point to fill out those gaps, and then taking a look at what separate boxes you can buy, or ideally going on eBay and buying stuff separately from Endometers, for example. If you just want an Overlord and you buy all the other stuff separately, you can get the Endometers Overlord for what? £5 on eBay, I think. It's very, very cheap. And yeah, if you have any questions about specific dynasties or a specific dynasty lists, please drop them in the comments. I have pretty much read the codex like 10 times over, and I have built lists for all of the separate dynasties when it comes to Crusade, narrative, and even some competitive lists, even though some dynasties are a little bit wonky on that. So if you want any feedback or tips, drop them in the comments and I'll be glad to help you out. Other than that, that's it for the tips. I hope it was a little bit helpful for you, and I see you in the next video. Bye bye.